It's now 7 p.m. and I'd like to start this meeting. I'm Councillor Adam Carter and I am the chair of this committee. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for the publication on the council website. Officers attending virtually on Microsoft Teams, please use the raise your hand option when you wish to speak, and Rihanna will note this down and will let me know. Apologies for absence. I have received no apologies. Rhiannon, have any other apologies been given?
Yes, I've had apologies from Councillor Kerrin, who is being substituted by Councillor Worrell. Apologies from Kim James from Health Watch and from Angela Surrey.
Thank you. As for the minutes of the last meeting, I was not actually on the last committee, but I believe Councillor Anderson and Councillor Snell both were. So do you have any comment on the accuracy of the minutes?
No, Chair.
No. Okay, thank you. So I move that the minutes of the Children's Services ONS Committee meeting held on the 8th of February 2022 to be approved as a correct record.
Great.
Thank you. Item 3, items of urgent business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declaration of interest to make? No. Okay, for item 5, the Youth Cabinet update. The member of the Youth Cabinet could not attend tonight to provide an update, but they have provided a briefing note in their absence. Members to... sorry. Item 6 is a report from Thurrock Local Safeguarding Children's Partnership on pages 23 to 28. Can I ask Priscilla, Bruce, Annan and Jenny Coles to present the report, please?
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Good evening, everyone. My name is Priscilla Bruce, and I'll take you through the LSCP report for this meeting today. So my report is really an update from the work that the LSCP have been conducting since the last meeting and ongoing, and also an update on any of the work that we've been doing, as well as our priorities. So I'll take you through our priorities. So in our priority setting process, we have looked at a range of different contributors, factors. So we've looked at our data, so the LSCP data that comes in, which is multi-agency data. We've looked at the case audits and the outcomes from case audits, and looked at national and local reviews. And so for the reporting year 2020 to 2024, we've highlighted 5 key priorities, and those priorities are neglect, and this is around reducing the incidence of child neglect in the borough. We've also identified violence and vulnerability, and within that we are about to launch our joint project with the NSPCC around harmful sexualised behaviours in young people in the borough. Violence and vulnerability will also cover violence against women and girls, and also we'll be looking at the work that we do cross with the Community Safety Partnership. Our third priority is around Think Family. So we know that families don't exist in their own silos. We know that they have many connected relationships, and so it's about building on those relationships and making sure that we assess the whole connected relationships of the family and not looking at them in isolation. Transfers and transitions is our fourth priority, and we're looking at the points that bridge between primary, secondary and then post-16, and looking at transfers of families coming in and families going out with children, obviously, and then looking at the importance of sharing intelligence across agencies to make sure that families and children are both protected and supported at their most vulnerable times of change. Priority number 5 is looking at the emotional health and well-being of children, families, young people, and also across the multi-agency workforce. We know that the last 2 years have been incredibly tough for everyone, and we're looking at making sure that we bolster the emotional welfare of all our community, and making sure that any people that are struggling have got the required support and intervention and services in place to actually address their needs. So if I move on, the next stage is number 3, is working on the update of the LSCP work. So we have refreshed our learning and development programme, which has a range of different training options available for the multi-agency workforce. We've refreshed it in line with our priorities that I've just mentioned, and looking at the development of our delivery plan that flows from the priorities that we have identified. And in bolstering our development programme, we've also added in managing allegations against staff, particularly for our colleagues in education, and looking at extrafamilial harm and child exploitation. So making sure that our multi-agency workforce are skilled and knowledgeable enough to meet the challenge of that meets them. Looking at working together to safeguard children, there's a requirement set out for the partnership to ensure that sports and extracurricular activities have safeguarding for children at the forefront of what they do. And so working in partnership with the National Working Group, we are launching in July our Safe to Play campaign. And this is about making sure that sports facilities, cricket clubs, dance clubs, karate clubs, all have their safeguarding arrangements in place and are there to support our children and young people. And so we're launching that campaign at a conference in July, which is next month. We are working on our audit schedule, so on a year-by-year basis we look at what we need to do in terms of looking at dip samples of cases to make sure that they are running in line with the safeguarding arrangements that we have. And so we've just come to the end of our cycle, and we're just looking at the cases, the types of cases and the topics that we will be auditing in the next 12 months. And so that is rolling on, and we're particularly looking at quality assuring the voice of the child and the family in everything that we do with them. Moving down, so our commissioned external thematic review into serious youth violence has actually come to an end, and it will be published in the next few days. There was a deep dive, and also which aligned with the thematic review, and that should be published in the next few days. It's just to be signed off. There were some parts that we just needed to get full agreement on, which has now been done. Moving down, the local partnership has an obligation to provide an annual report on the safeguarding arrangements and what we have done in order to be effective and impactful. And we're just collecting some of that evidence and data to be able to publish our report sometime later on in the year. And once that report is published, it will go to What Works, it will go to the national panel, and it will be published on our website for all to read. So that's what we're doing at the moment. In terms of working in response to some of the national reviews, so you know that there's the Bradford review, the City and Hackney, Croydon and Solihull review, most recently the Child Q review, and also Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson. So in order for us as a partnership to assure ourselves that those incidences are far from happening in Thurrock, we are looking at the learning recommendations from those reviews and having a look at what we have in place as a partnership and what we need to do differently or more of in order to safeguard the children and young people in Thurrock. Moving down to point 4, so working on the case reviews that we have ongoing at the moment, I am pleased to say that the Sam and Carl Serious Case Review Action Plan has been completed and signed off by strategic partners, along with the Frankie Serious Case Review, that's also completed and signed off. We also had a peer review which looked at the internal workings of the partnership and the business unit and our policies and procedures. That's also now completed and signed off. So the ones that we have that we are working on now are the Leo Local Safeguarding Practice Review, which I'm pleased to say has one remaining action on there, which is around the Think family. So if you think about the priorities that we've got, it ties nicely in there, ties nicely in that, and that action is ongoing and it's close to completion at the moment. But we're just wanting to link it with some of the work that we've developed with the new Think Family service as well. Shay and Ashley Local Health Review, that's only just been signed off in terms of a multi-agency action plan, but work has started, and with the 14 actionable areas, 2 are already complete and they are running to timescale, so we're not concerned about any of those actions within there. And then if I just go down to item 5, as I talked about in the work that we're doing to assure ourselves in the partnership around what the other partnerships nationally are dealing with, we're looking at the reviews from Bradford, Solihull, Croydon and the Child Q report. That brings me to the end of my report. Is there any questions?
Thank you very much for your report. I'll now ask members if they have any questions on the report. Sorry, I didn't see you there. Yeah.
Thank you. I just have one question. You were doing the safeguarding, working together with all the organisations, the sports organisations. You were doing a conference in July. Who's attending? Who have you invited and how have you selected them?
So we've invited many of the organisations, sports organisations within the borough. So we've worked really closely with the National Working Group who have a list of sports organisations. We've also got a development officer within the local council that has a list of some of the sports clubs, dance clubs, many for sports facilities within the borough. And so we've invited them, we've contacted them. In terms of professionals that we've also invited are people like the Community Safety Partnership. We've invited our local LADO, so the local authority designated officer, to come and give some support and the guidance. We've also invited Essex Police to come along to give some talks as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Warren, did you?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I've got two questions, if you don't mind. Yeah. So the first one is on page 24, under 2.2 neglect.
Yes.
So where are we with this? And are our numbers rising, decreasing? So what is being done to reduce the numbers?
In terms of the numbers, I don't have the exact numbers. It's something that I can get for you. But what we're seeing is when we're looking at case reviews that are coming up, when we're looking at the dip samples of case audits that we're doing, there are some references to neglect within household cases. So it's something that we've identified, and also in some of the numbers that we're seeing that's coming through on cases, that actually this is still an ongoing issue that we need to tackle.
Okay. So is it going up, down? Is it stable? Is it like that? How do we compare to other neighbours, authorities?
Right, so that's information that I'll yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that on? Okay. Sorry, I'm Janet Simon. I'm the Assistant Director for Children's Social Care and Early Help. So in terms of the numbers of children that are open to children's social care, we know that our child in need numbers have reduced in comparison to our statistical neighbours, and in the region we know that our numbers are kind of comparable and actually slightly below. We know that we're doing a lot of work around early help, and as Priscilla has said, around family service, to make sure that we're kind of engaging families much earlier to sort of reduce the incidence of neglect. And our child protection numbers are fairly steady and at a good level in terms of the numbers of children who are on child protection plans and needing protection.
And is that all right if I have my second question? Is that all right? So on page 26, 4.5, the Shay and Ashley Local Health Review, you wrote that they've started on 2 of the action plans, but there's 14 actionable. So when will we see these completed? Is there a time frame for when they should be completed, and will we see any of the outcomes from this as a committee?
Yeah. So the action plan lists 10 recommendations, but some of those need to be broken down further, and so the 10 recommendations have been broken down further into 14. So you may have 1.1, 1.2, that kind of thing. So there 2 of those actions have been completed, so they're already done, and we're working through the other actions. This action plan was only just signed off earlier on in the year, and the action plan has got timescales on it. So it's got timescale when an action should be completed, and if not, what's the information that we need to do to push it on, to move it. And they are being monitored and tracked through our governance structure. So they go to various groups, they go to the strategic group, they go to our management exec board, and they monitor them as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Panjala.
Regarding this page number 24, 2.3, violence and vulnerability. We are working together with Southend, Essex and Thurrock. So as per Thurrock, our violence and vulnerability, how much ratio we have registered cases so far, and how we going to tackle? Do we have any data for that one?
I don't have data for numbers and ratios and things like that, but I know that when we do our joint work with SET, we do have numbers that we discuss in meetings, and we look at what we need to do to tackle the issues that we have. So if it's numbers, I could probably get the numbers for you, but I don't have them to hand. But we do work across SET and looking at the emerging issues and looking at what we're doing as a collective, but also what we're doing locally for our own issues as well.
Okay, and one more thing.
Yeah.
We have there is a crime prevention organization, Neighborhood Watch, Thurrock Neighborhood Watch. We have that organization have nearly 10,000 volunteers across the district, and that one is running through Essex also. They have more than 100,000 volunteers. So I am feeling like I am as a ward coordinator for Ravelli and Upland, working from past 4.5 years. I felt like Thurrock Council need to get involved more with the Neighborhood Watch coordinators. Volunteers are there. We can take their help, support in order to bring down the crime, so that we can make our younger generation into the right track. Because the primary school and the secondary school, that is a main important thing. No? More younger generation is going into the wrong direction. So from when they are shifting into secondary, so that one we need to take a more precaution. So are we taking something like that, working together with the Neighborhood Watch, organizations?
Yeah, so as the Local Safeguarding Children's Partnership, we work very closely with the Community Safety Partnership, and I know that they do a lot of work with the Neighbourhood Watch Service. So what I'll do is I can contact my opposite number in that service to see if we can reach out to do some work with the Neighbourhood Watch as well. But you're absolutely right, there is something about tackling emerging issues early and making sure that we get in there before the numbers rise. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Now I have a question for Jenny, who's doing this on Teams. We now have a question from Jenny, who's joining us on Teams. I think we had some audio difficulties there.
Yeah, sorry. It wasn't a question, actually. It was just a comment. Going back to what we were talking about, neglect, and just picking up what Janet Simon said around Think Family, and a real key part of that is early intervention to prevent the neglect coming to a point where children have to be on child protection plans. And our partner, certainly our partners and our health colleagues are a key part of that. And just to say as well, in terms of numbers of child protection plans, to reinforce what Janet was saying, in terms of numbers in Thurrock, they are steady and they benchmark in terms of comparison very well in terms of stat neighbours and also nationally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to page 26.4.6, where we're looking and considering the findings from the National Panel Reviews. Now, I don't know how long you've been looking at those and how much time you had to consider that, but I would imagine that usually it's a failing of a system or it's a failing of individual persons. So my question is, do we know what the issues are there at this moment? And are we confident that in Thurrock we have the systems and the personnel in place? I know you can't ever guarantee that this won't happen, I do understand that, but have you been able to pick out what these people were not doing that we are doing? Thank you.
So what we've done is we've looked at all the recommendations, we've looked at all the reviews, and we've looked at the recommendations, and what we've pulled together, dare I say, is a chart that looks at the recommendations, so really looking at where the agencies needed to do something differently, and we've pulled together that chart that identifies the agencies that were responsible for those recommendations and kind of reflected that in the Thurrock partnership. And so we've sent out those recommendations to all our partner agencies that are responsible for those recommendations and asked them to evidence what they have in place to meet those recommendations. So there are two columns. What do you have in place to ensure that we can meet this recommendation? And if you don't have what you need or you need to do more, can you tell us what that is and when you envisage that would be in place by? So that's how we're tackling it.
Yeah, and that's great, and that's pretty much the sort of answer I expected. It's just that we do get in a situation where every time something happens, we get another set of reviews and another set of things we should be doing. And you always kind of wonder, well, why weren't we doing these things always. I mean, it's always like we're doing really, really good things until something happens, and apparently we weren't doing really, really good things, and we've got to do some more really, really good things. But I'm just want to get sure that Thurrock has looked at that and thought, well, do you know what? We're doing a lot of that already, and we've taken the new stuff on board. I mean, is that what's happened in this case?
Yeah, so we are at the start of that. So we've only just started to gather that documentation. I think it's only gone out to agencies about 2 weeks ago, and we've given them a month to kind of come back with their evidence. So we're looking at making sure that we have got the things in place. So what you're saying, every time a review comes out, we look at it and we say, oh, why weren't we doing this and why weren't we doing that? So for us, we're doing that reflection that the other agencies are doing in other areas, and saying, actually, let's look at this now so that we know that we can assure ourselves that these things aren't being done. And then just to answer the other part of your question, what we do is when we do complete action plans of reviews, we go back and have a look at the actions, the agencies that were tasked with those actions, and go back and ask them to review and evaluate, are you still doing the things that you said that you would do to make sure this doesn't happen, or try to make sure this doesn't happen, and how is that working for you? How effective is it, and does it need tweaking?
Janet.
Thank you, Chair. So just kind of leading on from what Priscilla's saying about how we're making sure that we're robust and that we're reassuring ourselves that actually some of these failings that are within these reports, that we're covering those off. So we've looked at the recommendations, we've looked at some of the areas where there were issues, we've looked at the sort of the Solihull JTI where they've done a joint targeted area inspection, and within our MASH, where all our referrals come in and our contacts, we've actually done a multi-agency MASH audit. So we've done audits with partners, so we've had partners from health, from education. Jenny herself has come in and done joint audits with us. So we've made sure that we've looked at audits as they're coming in and the kind of decisions that are being made, that they're timely, that they're considering any safeguarding issues, just to reassure ourselves that what we're doing is right, that we've absolutely got the threshold right. And so far, in those audits, actually those cases have come out as good and outstanding. So we know that actually it's very robust. Also within our MASH, there are regular audits that happen fortnightly within the multi-agency network that works in the MASH, and then a wider audit is done, I think it's every other month across the partnership, a sort of a senior leadership across the multi-agency network. So we're absolutely looking at those things and making sure that referrals, when they come in, that they are being addressed appropriately, that we're asking the right questions, and that we are absolutely having those discussions.
If I could just add to that, the work that Janet and the LSEP and the team have done, that work did not happen where these incidences happened. So, we are always looking at our work and checking and seeing, are we doing the right thing? Having a look into, what's happening on the ground. We make sure that the caseloads are right for the workers, that we've got the right agencies working, because one of the issues raised is that there wasn't enough multi-agency working going on, which is where Priscilla and Jenny come in, because they're looking at the partnership, whereas Janet and myself are concentrating on what do children's social care provide, i.e., the social care part, the operational part. So we do work really closely across partners, and we're very open to constantly looking at our practice, and our practitioners are very used to that, and are quite happy for people to come in from other agencies and look at what they're doing and talk about why decisions are made. It's very complex work, as you can imagine.
And when we're doing those audits, we're doing them alongside staff as well. We make sure that our managers have reasonable spans of controls, that people have got the capacity to do the work that they need to do and do it right.
Thank you very much. I think that's exactly what us councillors need to hear, that kind of what is going on beyond the scenes, because we want to try and avoid this, obviously, and it looks like we're doing the best we can to avoid that, which is good. Thank you very much.
Jenny?
I was just going to really reinforce what Janet had said, that we didn't, as soon as we knew the Ofsted inspection for the Solihull tragic case of Arthur, we immediately got onto that and did that multi-agency MASH audit, and did a really quick look at the recommendations, so a really quick look to see where we were. And obviously, as Priscilla said, we're doing a more in-depth look now. But that MASH audit, which had police and education people were involved in it as well, came out positive, and already the learning's been picked up across the team, and that was reported to the LSCP this week. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick one. I remember from the last meeting you mentioned that an external review on serious youth violence would be done. I think it was in March. The report tonight briefly mentions this review and says that the learning and recommendations from it, you'd have sight of those in June. I'm just trying my luck here in case we're just over halfway through June. If you've got any sort of verbal update you can give us on that at all, with our next meeting being a couple of months away, I thought I'd...
Yeah, so just earlier in the report, I think it does say that it's out in June, but it's literally days. So Jenny and myself were just looking at maybe signing it off and then having a media publicity statement that goes out. So it should be on our website in the next couple of days.
Are there any more questions? Then can we turn to the recommendation 1.1 on page 24? Thank you. Moving on to item 7, the care review of children's social care and the National Safeguarding Panel review of child protection. Can I ask Janet Simon to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this sort of leads on from what Priscilla's just been discussing and the conversation we've just had around the reviews and how we're kind of reassuring ourselves. So this report is about 2 reviews that have happened recently. So there's the National Child Safeguarding Review into Child Protection, and there's a National Care Review. So the National Care Review is 270 pages, it has 80 recommendations, and it calls on government to be ambitious for children. The National Child Safeguarding Review into Child Protection looks into the tragic deaths of Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson, and it identifies a set of challenges which get in the way of child protection work. So the care review is likely to require legislative change to put recommendations into action. So it's requiring 2.6 billion over 4 years to kind of make the changes, and the author, Josh McAllister, is suggesting a 5-year timescale. And the focus in the report is on family help. It's very in line with our Think Family service and the work we're trying to do currently, working alongside families and helping them to find solutions that are safe for their children, and supporting kinship carers, supporting family members to care for children wherever possible, looking at schools being statutory safeguarding partners and reducing some of the bureaucracy around social work. The Safeguarding Review has 8 recommendations, and they include the needs for robust multi-agency strategy discussion, resources to allow multi-agency engagement in child protection processes, robust information sharing, so that's about the multi-agency network, use of language. So they talk about referrals, and they talk about the use of language in terms of referrals and how we can enable and support people to make referrals. And if we think about our language when we talk about referrals, if we use terms such as malicious, how that impacts on people in making referrals. And they talk about the introduction of a multidisciplinary team to work on safe child protection cases. So that's just a kind of an overview. I'm not going to read every single word for you because I'm sure you've all had an opportunity to read it.
Thank you very much for your report, Janet. I'd just like to start with a quick question first. It's on page 30, 2.2. We have got 76 million to recruit 9,000 more foster carers over 3 years. I know Thurrock's already started quite an ambitious foster carer recruitment strategy. Will this new bit of legislation affect our targets in any way?
Investment in recruiting foster carers is always welcome. It's a national issue. We know that recruiting foster carers is a national issue. yes, I mean, anything that we can get to help us and support us in recruiting foster carers would always be welcome. And, I mean, the review does make some recommendations about the use of, you know, family members and trying to always use family members first. You know, for most children, you know, if they can stay with their families, we know that children will often drift back to their families as they get older. So if we can find ways to support kinship carers, and I think what the review's talking about, how we can support kinship carers to make sure they get the same support that a foster carer, somebody who's applying who's a stranger foster carer for a child, that kinship carers will get the same sort of support. So it might be that we can increase our kinship carers alongside our foster carers that apply to be foster carers generally. Whether it will make a huge difference, I don't know. I know that the feeling within the report is that there are lots of people out there who want to be foster carers, and that if we do more to support them, we'll get more foster carers. Our offer to foster carers in Thurrock is very good. The remuneration is really good. We review it regularly. We make sure we're in line with agencies who charge more than we pay. They charge more, but we actually pay our foster carers at a very comparable rate. We council tax. We make sure that our foster carers' council tax is paid. They're very well supported through our supervising social workers. We have therapists on board who can support them. So we do quite a lot. So I think one of our questions back to this review is, what are the ideas behind that? So what will that look like in terms of recruitment? So money is great, but also we need to think about how creative, and we've been very creative in our fostering recruitment over the last year. A lot more creative than I think we've been ever. We've tried an awful lot of things. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to say, yes, we'll have all these foster carers if they give us 76 billion or million or whatever it is. But yes, I don't know. We will obviously try our best.
Thank you very much, Janet. Do any other... Councillor Cockshott.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for the report. Just a quick thing, we're on page 31, 2.4, phasing out of unregulated care placements. I know, like 2021, we banned it for under 16s, and looking at how does this affect Thurrock in terms of how many unregulated positions do we actively use at the moment in Thurrock, and what would this, in terms of how much of an impact would it actually have on children in care?
So currently we have, I think, 2 young people in an unregistered arrangement. It's something we will always avoid. It's a very, very last resort, but we're really robust with those. We review them regularly. We make sure Ofsted is informed. We will do increased visits, but it's an absolute last resort for us. We would always want children. Our first priority is foster care. We can find a fostering arrangement. And then if we can't, then it is sometimes residential. And we will try all sorts of creative ways to kind of make a placement work, you know, sort of offering additional support and resources if that's what's required. So it is unusual for us to have unregistered arrangements. It's not a matter of course.
Can I just add, I think what they're suggesting in the review is that is we have what we call supported accommodation for 16 pluses, and I think they're saying that needs to be regulated and not be just supported accommodation but provide care. So the difference is that for some older young people who maybe 16, 17, coming up 18, don't want to be in a care arrangement, but they can be in a supported arrangement, then that's not regulated by Ofsted, and that is allowed under the current legislation. And we have got quite a few children in younger people in the 16 plus. What this is proposing is that would also become illegal, and all placements would have to provide care, not just supported accommodation. So that would be a big shift. It would be quite a resource intensive thing, not just for Thurrock but across the whole piece. And it would probably mean fees would increase, because if those placements have to take on the regulation that Ofsted require, there'll probably be more staff required, etc., etc. So we would find our fees going up for those sorts of placements as well.
And for some young people, they would struggle with that level of intensity.
Councillor Panjala.
Sorry. Page number 31, under the 2.5 second point, can we know what is the current position of the recruitment and retention of social workers?
Okay, so we, in terms of our social workers, we have some agency workers, but we have a consistent supply of permanent workers. So in terms of the management group, most of our managers, the majority of our managers are permanent. In terms of our social work workforce, we know that we have a number of social workers where we do have agency. So in terms of if we compare ourselves against our statistical and national, our retention is pretty good. But there is a challenge nationally around social workers and recruiting and retaining social workers. But I would say our retention, in terms of our vacancy rate, is running at around 20% in terms of social workers. But we do have experienced agency social workers in those positions.
Thank you.
Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. You talked about payments to foster carers, and then you talked about payments to foster carers, and then kinship, placements. Do we pay kinship an allowance to look after? Only I know of a family that's got a baby and they're struggling, and they've got a social worker, but they're not being paid a penny.
So if the arrangement...
The baby that they've taken on as well.
Yeah. So if we make an arrangement for a child to be cared for and placed with a family member, then they would be what we call, we would do what we call a Reg 24. So we would actually do an assessment of that person to make sure that it's appropriate, and we would pay them a fostering allowance. And then while the assessment's going on, for all of our foster carers, we expect them to do what we call skills to foster, and we expect them to do certain training. Once they've been approved as foster carers, if that's what they choose to do, then we would move them to the next stage, and they would get paid the skills allowance as well. But our kinship carers, if they are foster carers, get a fostering allowance, the same as ours. I know that doesn't happen in every local authority, but in Thurrock, we yeah, sure.
I think the crucial point is about if it is a social care request of a family, or if it's a family making their own arrangements, as families sometimes do, and that's fine. So if it's an arrangement where social workers have got involved and said, and we don't want that child to leave your care, then that should be a kinship arrangement. So if you want to pick that up with us after, yeah, we'll do that.
And can I just ask another question? And it talks about, there's a lot going to be happening in this case review, and there's going to be a lot of changes to work. And do we know how much money is going to come along for? Are we going to be doing this more work with the same amount of money, or is there big pots of money that we'll be receiving to do much better care? I'm just being wishful here. Just thought I'd ask that question.
So the report does actually name. It says how much money it thinks it should need, really, and that it's an ambition. So, as I said, it's 2.6.
That's not what you're getting, though. It's an ambition, isn't it?
It's not just for Thurrock either.
No.
No, absolutely. It's
great if it was, but no, it's not just for Thurrock. Obviously, as it says, it requires quite a lot of commitment from the government. We don't know the government's response to this yet. So until we have that response, it's really difficult to say what's going to come with it. And
what the government have said is it means 80 recommendations. It's a massive review. It will have fundamental changes for how we all work and for families as well, which is a positive if all of this comes to pass. So what we need in the sector is the government are reviewing this. They've said by the end of the year they will give their response. So they may not accept all the recommendations. They may accept some. They may say, this one's most important. We want you to do that in a year. Some of these changes would require legislative change. So what we expect to see probably from the government towards the end of the year is something that addresses all the issues raised here and maybe set out what sort of funding is going to be available nationally.
And is there a time frame for when the report, you'll know more? When's the consultation end and when will we get a response?
We've not got anything formal. What the government have said is by the end of the year.
Oh, okay.
So if we say December the 31st, if it comes earlier, that's great.
Okay.
Then
okay.
I know that in the DFE, they've got a lot of civil servants working on this, working on the different recommendations, because they'll be making recommendations to the government as well, to the ministers, to say which of this is achievable, how quickly, and what do we need in the sector in terms of funding. But the author has been very clear what he thinks the funding is that's required.
Thank you for that. Councillor Anderson.
Just picking up again quickly on the funding topic. Obviously, we've got $2 billion here in family help. Is there anywhere in this review, this report, that sort of suggests how that funding is going to be distributed between local? Like, what's the mechanism for deciding who gets right?
No. What they have done is they've differentiated between what they think should be used for different areas across the country, but they haven't really sort of said, well, each local authority will get this, and so that's really hard for us to tell at the moment.
I mean, I suspect if we think about other programmes that have happened, there'll be a combination, I think, of trailblazing, so money for projects that will, of local authorities that will bid to say we can start to deliver X or Y. And there'll also be some kind of criteria that's applied around finance that we've already got in place across the whole country. So I suspect there'll be a bit of both. A bit of everyone needs a bit of something to make these changes. We've been recently included in the Family Hubs pilot, and there is some funding that goes with that, and that's very much about family support and family help, really. So we'll already start in Thurrock on looking at that. We've not actually had the amount that we're going to get from that yet, have we?
No, we haven't. So we know that across the country, 75 authorities have been put forward for this and are eligible for the family hubs. 300 million over 3 years, but we don't know what proportion we'll get. But as Sheila said, is that they're asking for people to trailblaze, so there will be funding attached to that. But there will also be funding attached to different bits, and there'll be some sort of formula around sizes of local authorities and things like that.
Just to add, in terms of the National Safeguarding Report, one of the things they're talking about is introduction of multidisciplinary teams specific to child protection. And Jenny's actually on the panel, the national panel. And, one of the things we were thinking about is when this comes out, we feel in Thurrock we might be well placed to be thinking about, could we pilot some of this? It hasn't come out yet, but that's the sort of thing we're looking at with the partners, because this will be very much about having a partnership team focused mainly on child protection. So that's one of the things that we'd certainly, Jenny's nodding, we're already looking and waiting to see when something comes out on that, because we'd be keen to go forward on that. What we're really clear about is when you're going through, and when we start going through this change, is not to take our eye off the ball of every day. So we still have, children who need our support every single day. So we have to make sure we don't disrupt that whilst we start thinking about and moving to something else.
Thank you very much for that. Do any other members have any questions? No. I would just like to say myself, this is a fairly new report. I mean, it hasn't been out very long, so we will, as you said, the government will be reviewing this by the end of the year. So we'll be getting a more complete picture of how this piece of legislation will affect Thurrock in the new year, I presume. So, thank you very much. There's no other questions. I would ask we go to the recommendation on page 30. 1.1 and 1.2. At the
Agree.
Agree. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 8. This is Educational National Drivers, Schools White Paper, SEND and AP Green Paper, Levelling Up Skills Act, Schools Admission and Attendance Guidance on pages 35 to 45. Can I ask Michelle Lucas to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. And I think you heard by the title there's a number of things that are coming out around education, as I say. So I'll talk through. I won't read all the things out. Clearly, the first thing I want to talk about is the Schools White Paper, which is around opportunity for all. There are some sort of key strategic drivers in here around, you know, attainment levels for both primary and secondary going forward. I think some of the things that are interesting for me is schools will offer a minimum school week of 32.5 hours. I have to say I've got some education colleagues. I highlighted that one specifically because I realise on the committee we've got some education colleagues, and that's by September 2023. Now, interestingly, when I speak to schools, most of them will say, but we're already doing that, Michelle, in some way or another. So I think that will be interesting to see how that sort of plays out. I think the other one that's a focus for us here is that by 2030, all schools will be part of a strong multi-academy trust. Now, that's a really interesting statement, actually, because Thurrock has got a multi-academy trust, a number of them, but we've also got a number of what we call standalone academies. So there will be single schools that stand alone and manage their own business, for want of a better word. And what this is suggesting at the moment, I mean, it will go forward to be what's going in law, is that they will all become part of families of schools, might be a better way of describing it, or multi-academy trusts. Interesting, Sheila and myself have met with our standalone schools, and we're actually due to meet them in a couple of weeks' time to just talk through this with them, just to see what that looks like. Because our schools are happy in the way they currently operate. So it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward. Clearly, if a school goes into either requires improvement or inadequate, then there are mechanisms to make that happen sooner, but all of our standalone schools are good. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think the other one I wanted to briefly touch on was around access to funded training for senior mental health leads. And I'm proud of the work Thurrock have done in this area, actually. We've had our school wellbeing service operating now for 2.5 years. We've also got a range of mental health teams in schools. Government have announced further funding to teaching hubs to enable them to develop training packages. So I think there's ways in which Thurrock have almost led the way with some of this work, particularly around the school wellbeing service and more recently the mental health sort of teams in schools. So again, we need to see how that works its way through. I'll move on to SEND and alternative provision, if I may, because colleagues would have had a chance to read the paper. There's an awful lot in this one. I think bringing special educational needs and alternative provision together under one framework is really positive. Many of the children that we have in alternative provision have got a range of SEND requirements. I think that's a positive. They've literally yesterday announced the framework, so I've not had a chance to really look at the framework yet, but they've just announced the framework for that. They're talking about new standards across education, health and social care to enable us to develop a higher performing SEND system. And again, I think that will be, as we move forward on that, I think the work Thurrock have done in relation to bringing our dashboards together, making sure we've got a comprehensive offer. Committee, or those that have been on committee for a while, will be aware that our revisit for SEND, all of our areas for areas of weakness were removed. So I think we've got a good platform to work that through. I think the other thing that we need to work through in this system is how we go to a more digital platform. So government are talking about an online portal. We've already been talking about that for colleagues that have been on committee for a while. We've been talking about that as part of our SEND work going forward. I'm pleased to inform committee that we've now managed to secure the resources to move that forward. So we're really excited about that, and yeah, hopefully that will create a digital solution for people to be able to review their plans. I'll move on, as I said. So the Skills and Post-16 Education Act. This is one I think that government have been looking at for a while. So how do we enable skills development? And I think again, Thurrock have been really positive about that. My title is Education and Skills. So there's a real driver around skills. Some of the things coming out now as part of the Levelling Up agenda and shared prosperity funding is something called Multiply, which is about ensuring that adults have got those maths skills to enable them to develop and progress in career opportunities. Now, that's not going to be easy, colleagues, because actually schools struggle to recruit maths tutors or maths teachers. And if you saw in the report, there's going to be enhanced payments for maths, physics, chemistry, those types of subjects. So what we're looking at is how can we build capacity locally in our system, and that's what we've put in part of our Multiply sort of like implementation plan that we're pulling together. But that does bring resource into Thurrock, which is fantastic. It will enable us to work with the 18 pluses actually in this instance, which absolutely fits into this part of the agenda going forward. Moving on, around school attendance, I think this is going to be a really interesting one. Clearly, what the government recognised during COVID was that they needed to have really real reassurance around attendance in schools and around young people's attendance. I think you'll have heard in the news that there's reports often that, a number of young people right across the country are not attending school, and actually what we do know is that can lead to all sorts of other challenges. If they're not in school, where are they? What are they doing? Are they getting involved in some risky behaviours? Does that mean we're going to have to look at some sort of further intervention? So I think this is going to be an area that's going to have a key focus on it. Just to make committee aware, we have a fortnightly meeting which is around children missing education. So we're monitoring and tracking those children that are not in some form of formal education on a fortnightly basis. Clearly, when we think about alternative provision, we've got Olive Academy that deals with our secondary, and I think committee won't remember this, but probably about 5 years ago, we took the strategic decision to move away from what was then primary pro. We did not feel that putting little children in a pupil referral unit was the right way to go. So we've developed a number of inclusion bases within our schools system that actually supports those young children that are at risk of permanent exclusion. So I think attendance is going to be a key driver for us. We need to consider how we collect that data, because what's very clear here is that government is saying it's immaterial whether they're an academy or a maintained school. It's incumbent on the local authority to be able to pull that data together and to be able to report on that data. So I think this is an area that we're going to have to do some real focused thinking as we go forward. Clearly, there's also talk about, just picking up on social care, how we're monitoring through the virtual school. So I'm pleased that there's some additional resource coming into our virtual school to be able to monitor that. So I think, but for me, this is going to be a key driver for us during the autumn term, to make sure that we've got the appropriate systems and processes in place to enable us to track that. But as I've said before, because all of our schools bar one now are academies or part of multi-academy trusts. I've put a comment, I've put a sentence here to say that there will be a period of transition. These are significant changes around the education landscape, and they will take time to work through. Clearly, we need to think about how we're working with our most vulnerable. So we track our young people not in education, employment or training. We've got a range of programmes that looks to support them, to re-engage them into some form of education, employment or training. But for me, having been in education for many, many years now, I think some of the things we've got coming on here are some of the most significant changes that we've seen in a while. You know, we could spend ages on just the first one, couldn't we, around opportunity for all, bringing together SEND and AP, looking at skills and what skills look like, and then how we monitor and track attendance so that we can ensure that our children and young people are attending school. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, because there's an awful lot in this report.
Thank you very much for the report, and you're right. There's quite a good amount there to get our teeth into. Would any members like to speak?
I've got a few questions. So if anybody wants to go first, go on.
No, you had your hand up first.
Oh.
No, okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I'm going to jump into skills first, if that's all right. My big thing is, I think should be proud of what Thurrock can offer as a skills hub. We've got brilliant logistic opportunities here. We've got arts opportunities. This is something we should be promoting, and I understand from personal experience, friends who got shoved down to education pathways and were told, no, you must go to college, you must do this. It's taken him 5 years to get his life back on track. He left school with no GCSEs, and suddenly now he's finally got this opportunity in Thurrock. And I think it's something we should be really proud of. Too long we're sending people down. Go to school, go to education, go to college, go to university. There is life beyond this, and it's this skills programme. And I think Thurrock can lead the way in this. And it's more of a comment, but we should be proud of this opportunity we've got.
Councillor Worrell.
Michelle, you'd expect me to have a few questions. So, first of all, if we do go to this multi-agency, academies, which is very likely, it's going to be happening, what will be the role of Thurrock Council if we do go down this? Will they have a role? Because the multi-agency academies will be themselves ruling, won't they?
So they absolutely will have a role, Councillor. I mean, I think we have to remember that they're all multi-academy trusts or standalone trusts now, and we've got quite a strong role in working in partnership. I think the key is partnership, how we ensure that we work with all of our schools to enable all of our children and young people to get the best possible opportunities that they can. I think if you start looking at the attendance is a key one, Councillor, because actually that will be down to the local authority to ensure that that's being undertaken. Coming back to skills, because I know that's an area of interest. If you look at the data that we have to submit to the Department of Education around those young people not in education, employment or training. And I think the other thing is it's about how we broker those relationships. Because what the local authority, and I think COVID has been an interesting one, really bringing that home, is that the local authority acts as a bit like the anchor, for want of a better word, and actually supports all of our schools in driving up, the attainment for all of our children and young people. So there's a strong role for the local authority. I think as these things move forward, if you come to special educational needs, again, it's the responsibility of the local authority around the educational healthcare plan. Again, the responsibility of the local authority to commission all of the alternative provisions. So there are a range of things that the local authority has responsibility for. One of the challenges, I think, for us is that we've got an awful lot of responsibilities, but over time, which is totally understandable, the grant has reduced. So we've had to be really creative in our thinking around how we draw more money into the local authority. So you'll be aware of some of the programmes we've got running to support our NEET young people down at the Inspire Youth Hub. So we've been creatively thinking about how do we bring more funding into the local authority to support some of those areas, recognising that we knew the grant would be on a sliding scale. And because we've got all academies, we don't get the grant that other local authorities would get. They've probably got a bit of a mixed economy, really. So they may have a number that maintain schools.
So if we had more multi-academies, will we get even less money than we're already getting as we become more? or is that sliding scale gone?
No, that's gone now,
Right,
Councillor.
okay.
So no, that's
What
it
we've got
now.
is what we've got.
What we've got is what we've got.
I'm worried
yeah.
about money over everything, you know. So when it talks on 2.5, Ofsted will inspect every school by 2025, including the backlog of outstandings. What is our backlog of outstanding schools that need to be inspected? Have we got a big backlog?
No, we haven't, Councillor.
Right, okay.
We haven't got a big backlog. I mean, I think, having spoken to Ofsted recently, I think what they're trying to do is make sure that they have been to all of the schools by the 2025. What I've noticed, actually, is we've had an awful lot of our early years providers going through Ofsted at the moment. And I think I've reported to committee before, early years is a strength for this local authority. You know, we've got very few providers, and it is very few providers that are not good or better. And that includes our childminders as well as our private settings, as well as our early years in schools. So we haven't got that sort of challenge going forward. But Ofsted will want to get round to all of those schools because they lost 2 years, of course. You know, with the pandemic, they weren't able to get out and inspect. So they're certainly trying to make sure they get round to all of our schools.
And do we know how many we need to have inspected? We don't.
I can get you that information.
Do you mind? Yeah, I'd like to know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's on a rolling programme, Councillor, so some will have been inspected, but it's on a rolling programme. But no, that's fine.
It's
we
the
can get you
backlog.
that.
Yeah. Okay, and so this recruiting, this is a national picture for how many teachers need to be recruited. So to come to Thurrock on a £30,000 starting salary is probably sounds like a lot of money, but when you try and rent and live here, and we've got no key worker houses that are specific for key workers, it's difficult, you know, to be able to recruit those. So where are we with recruiting what we need, and are we doing well, you know, for that?
I have to say, we regularly meet with the CEOs, so they're the Chief Operating Officers of the Multi-Academy Trust, as well as the infrastructure chairs for both the Thurrock Primary Association of Head Teachers and the Thurrock Primary Association of Head Teachers. There was some challenges around recruitment, but they've not raised it with me recently, Councillor. So my feeling is that actually recruitment for teachers is okay. I'll tell you where there is the challenge. It's the recruitment for learning support assistants. It's the recruitment for support staff seems to be more of a challenge at the moment for schools, but they're not reporting. What we do is we've got sort of a recruitment and retention group that work with our schools around this so that we can look at where there might be opportunities. But as I reported, some of the challenges are in the specialist subjects.
Okay.
So the maths, the chemistry, the physics, those really specialist subjects.
And do we know if we've got any, you know, enough to... We've got expanding schools. I think, like, we agreed another school last week at planning, you know, so how many ITTs do we have, you know, like, and are they going on to have the career, or is there a big drop-off with this?
So with the... it's changed to early career teachers now, so there's been a change. So what would have been NQTs a while ago is now called early careers teachers. The management of that is via the teaching hub, which is Harris.
Yeah.
So, and my understanding is, and having spoken to them quite recently, is that they've got a number of you know, early careers teachers coming through the system. I think part of the challenge for me going forward will be the retention.
Yeah.
So I think bringing people into teaching as a career, I think that part of the system is working. I think the challenge becomes it's the retention, it's that, and it's been a really difficult couple of years. You know, we can't underestimate the challenges for our teaching colleagues. You know, they've been trying to manage children coming in school. They've had to really sort of like quite quickly get to an online learning offer. So I don't think we can underestimate actually the challenges that they've faced. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Snell. Sarah.
Okay, so thinking of on 2.6 with the white paper, it says a register for the children not in school, and then obviously 5.2 is attendance. Over the past year, I've had, this is speaking as a teacher, children coming into my class from other local authorities that are in, one was in foster care and one was moved by their local authority into Thurrock and then moved back. They were both on my register within the school, one for 6 weeks after leaving the school, having been moved to another foster family, and another one for 8 weeks, still on my register, having moved back out of the area up north. So how is that managed? Because obviously that makes my class attendance looks very poor, but also these children are missing 8 weeks, 6 weeks of their education when, one had been moved back to a different foster family and the other one had moved back up north. That's a lot of education that they've missed, but it looks like they're still in my school because they're on my register. How can we manage that? And also, is there children that are moving into Thurrock that are in that same situation? Have they come from out of Thurrock that are still on their old school registers that are not showing anywhere?
So I think the issue of children moving in who have moved in from different authorities on social care is a real challenge. We recognise that. I think the responsibility lies with the virtual school, of course. So I would imagine, I'm saying that, you would have had contact with the virtual school. If it's a Thurrock child that's moved somewhere else, our virtual school gets in touch sort of straight away to make sure that transitions where it is. But I think, as Janet's report said earlier, it's really difficult, colleagues, when you've got children that you're trying to place and you place for a period of time and then for whatever reason that breaks down, so you're having to move again. It's not something that anyone does lightly. It's not something that happens lightly, but I do hear what you're saying, and I think there will always be some children that are in that position because of the system and how it operates. You talk about those that are moving into the authority. So when they move into the authority, clearly they apply via the normal admissions sort of rounds, and then the admissions team will work hard to secure, a place within, within where they're living. But again, that's difficult because if all those schools are full, then we're faced with having to offer a place that might be a significant place, a significant period away from where they live. And then, of course, we're picking up transport because we have to transport the child to the school. So it's a difficult, thing to manage. But I think coming back to the one around social care, there would be links with the virtual school, and they would, as I said, look to see what's possible for that child. I don't know if Janet's got, if you've got any other comment. I think that's my view.
We would always, where children are looked after, we will always try and keep them in their school because we know how important it is for them to maintain links with their own community, to be near their families. So wherever possible, even if they move to the next borough, or as long as it's feasible, we try and keep them in their local school. But if a child is placed, for some reason is placed out of authority and miles away, then we would be looking at changing school because we know that's impossible for them to come. But I would expect there to be conversations with the local authority that they're going to via our virtual school, as Michelle has said.
Yeah, thank you. These both came from out of Thurrock into Thurrock for about 6 weeks and then went back out. So, yeah, I understand it's really difficult. It was just about, how we manage all that lost learning as well, isn't it, really? So, no, thank you.
Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, really. One more a comment than a question. I was recently privy to a survey that was done by a master's student who did a survey of newly qualified teachers coming out of a particular college with a bent upon asking them what their knowledge was of SEND education. And I was quite surprised to see that a lot of SEND modules are optional on the courses that they were all doing. So some took the module, but a lot didn't. And now we get to this where we're asking for teachers to come and get trained, and we're talking about and trying to improve SEND provision across all of the schools. I wonder if we're going to experience an issue where there's going to be a lot of teachers that haven't had any particular, especially newly qualified teachers, any relevant SEND education, which could pose a problem going forwards. So that's one issue. But the second one is just the question regarding the local inclusion dashboard. I've not seen that written down before. I don't know what that is. I wonder if you could explain that one for me, please.
So the training of early careers teachers around SEND, I think that's something I've had a number of conversations with our teaching hub, as I said, which is Harris. And I think you're right to recognise that. I think this review will bring some change to that. I really do. I think the other thing in relation to that actually is that when it comes to the SENCO in the school, so the person in charge in the school for special educational needs, we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years around training and upskilling and supporting actually around their understanding, their view, and we've also looked at what we can offer to teachers as well. So I think we're trying to see what we can do as a local system. And that comes down to not only the education, because I think sometimes it is about an educational healthcare plan. So it's about also health going in. And I can give you a really good example. One of the things that we've recognised, and again I think I've reported to committee before, is that we've got a real challenge now within our early years sector. And that is around little ones have lost almost 2 years of that early language development, going to play groups, going to chatter groups, seeing other children and just having that opportunity. And what we've looked to do is put in some additional training for our early years providers. But we also recognised that health had a real key part to play here. So they came along and also contributed to the training, because what we're seeing is a significant increase in requests for educational healthcare plans for really little children. Now, the challenge for us is that because there's been language delay? And if that's the case, what can we do to try and enable some catch-up around that? There will be some that have got a special educational need, and we need to make sure we're picking those up as well. So that's an example of how we're looking at what's going on in the system and how we can support with that. So that's one example of how we're trying to use the resources we have around early years, health, to try and see what we can do to support within that early years sector. So that's an example. The inclusion dashboard, we have got our it's called a SEND dashboard at the moment, actually. So which picks up lots and lots of what's been put in here. What we've got to think about is, how do we now include alternative provision? So how do we now capture some of that data? The data is monitored by the SEND Development Board, which Sheila chairs. And it was one of the things that Ofsted commented on actually when they came, that, we had a robust set of data and the board were able to challenge that. So we're sort of there with that, but we've got further work to do because we must include alternative provision. But we're just waiting for more information to come out, because what I don't want to do is start requesting lots and lots of data only to find actually that's not really what we want within the inclusion dashboard. So I'm pleased to report to committee that we've got to do a bit more work on it, but we've got what I consider many of the things that have been pulled out in the green paper. On that, if I may, there's a couple of things for me about the green paper. I think one of the things we've been talking about is our health colleagues and how they form part of this overall system. And I think there needs to be some more work in relation to that. And I think the other one that, I'll have to pull out, of course, is not much reference to home to school transport. And that's a real challenge for us in the local authority. It's an area that, as committee are aware, is significantly overspending. I think within the review, there's a paragraph, it's right at the end of the document. So with our responses, and anyone I'm speaking to is saying responding, please put something in about home school transport. I think part of the challenge is it's a policy that's been in place for many years. It needs a review. It needs to be reconsidered. So I think they're the couple of things that I thought, that probably needs a bit more strengthening. So that's part of the feedback we will do. Just to make you aware, our engagement and participation group are pulling together the response, the local authority's response to the Green Paper, which will be signed off by our SEND sort of development board. So we're pulling that together, and that's a multi-agency, got parents on that group, just looking at how we want to respond. But we will, I think, put something in there around health having more contribution to this and where we are with homeschool transport.
Councillor Worrell.
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak again. So you've talked a lot about early years and, you know, the importance of early years, and, you know, an early start is the best start is what my own view is. So whilst it's not directly to the papers, are you confident that, you know, Tilbury's an area of high deprivation, you know, and the loss of the last 2 nurseries there, are you confident that we're going to be able to have a place for those children that, you know, they're taught how to, a lot of them are taught how to eat and, you know, how to write their name and the count to 10 before they get there, because otherwise we're going to pull down our infants and schools again. And I remember when I was a governor in Tilbury, it was the fact that they had to, those that hadn't gone to nursery were holding back the rest, and they've already got a lot of pressure. So I'm just, you know, are you confident that we're going to be able to place every child in Tilbury with somewhere to go? Thank you.
So what we do know is that there are a number of spaces across Tilbury within our schools. So we have got a number of places that are available. The team are working really hard at the moment because we're working with the other providers in that locality to see what they can offer. So we are working to ensure that there are the places for those children. You talk about confidence. We're doing the work, counsellor. So once we've done the work, then I'll be able to say, actually, this is what we've been able to do. So, you know, but there are nurseries in that area that have got availability. Yes.
Enough availability.
They've got availability, and we're working with other providers to ensure if there is further requirements that there'll be more places made available. And that's work we're doing at the moment. So, yeah.
Does any other member wish to speak? Yeah. Ask members to look at the recommendations 1.1 and 1.2 on page 35 to agree. Great. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, Children's Social Care Performance Q4 2021 to 22 on pages 45 to 62. Can I ask Janet Simon to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this report is around children's social care performance. The performance data in here helps us to measure ourselves against statistical benchmark against stat neighbours nationally and regionally, to help us to think about how we're performing, how well we're doing for children, and whether or not we're impacting on outcomes for children. What I won't do today is read through all the data in here, because I'm sure you've had the opportunity to look at it. So in just kind of looking at things that might be that may be slightly, you know, it might be easier for people to say, well, I'd like to discuss this area. Otherwise, what I can say is, in terms of our referrals, we can see that, you know, as we've come out of COVID, we had an up and down through COVID, where, you know, when we went into lockdown, numbers would drop. As we came out of lockdown, things would go up, and we're starting to see a levelling off in a number of areas. We had a lot of assessments sort of coming out of COVID, and now we can see that's levelling off back down. We can see that in terms of children looked after, our numbers have stabilised. So if we're looking at our statistical neighbours who are sitting around 350 per 10,000, as a local authority we're much lower than that at the moment. So our looked after numbers are going down, that's a good thing. In terms of unaccompanied asylum seekers, we as a local authority, our number should be 31. So every local authority is allocated a number of how many unaccompanied asylum seekers, and we tend to be within that region, around 28 to 30. Our children missing, that's been obviously an area that we've been really, really focused on, and looking at the graph at 4.41, you can see that our missing numbers In terms of, you can see that there was quite a rise as we came out of lockdown, and as we've kind of tapered back down again, sort of from December, our missing episodes, and in terms of individual children, some of those numbers have gone down, and some of that's affected by children going missing who are aged 16, 17, as they're approaching 18. So sometimes missing can be a young person who is actually at their friends, who says, I'm not coming home tonight, I'm staying at my friends. If we haven't agreed where they can be, and we can't verify it by actually seeing them there, then they're reported missing. Children who are subject to a plan, that's been fairly consistent. In terms of children subject to a repeat plan, that's also fairly consistent. And in terms of our care leavers, you can see here what our performance is like around our care leavers. So one of the things we know in Thurrock is that because we're a receiving authority around unaccompanied asylum seekers, then our care leaving numbers tend to be higher per 10,000. In terms of the ratio, they're higher than most other local authorities, because unaccompanied asylum seekers tend to come in at around 16, 17, and then they stay with us as care leavers. So that means that our care leaver numbers are often higher than other local authorities. In terms of being in touch with our care leavers, our percentages are pretty high. And in terms of adoption and permanency, our adoption numbers sort of kind of tapered down. Our court proceedings over COVID, there was lots of delays in terms of our court proceedings, and that was in being able to have face-to-face court proceedings, delays in assessments, and actually being able to make sure that we're making the right decisions for children, which was much harder during COVID. And as we're coming out, we're starting to see some of the fruition of some of that work we've been doing, and our adoption numbers are starting to go back up. So those children who are waiting for decisions are now getting those decisions, and we're starting to see some change there. So, any questions for me?
Thank you for your report, Janet. I would just like to highlight, before I open up to questions, how good on page 54, 5.2.1, I want to highlight how well we do with child protection reviews against both national and statistical neighbours. That's very good to see. So thank you. Thank you for the team for that. Are there any members who wish to ask questions? Councillor Warren.
I make it my policy to ask something. So on page 56, it talks about education, employment and training. And it says at the end of March 2022, 50.6 of the care leavers of 19 to 21 were in this. So that means nearly 50% are not doing anything, So what is it that we can do, because that's not good compared to like the neat numbers. And what we've got a good offer here in Thurrock. So why are they not taking that up? Is there a way of peer-to-peer, like doing review sessions? I mean, they come to corporate parenting, and there's lots going on. There must be a way of us being able to increase that, because they're going to be pulling up our numbers down on everything else. And we've got lots of good skill stuff going on. Yeah.
I'll just say something briefly, and then I'll hand on to
Thank you.
She leads on some of this. So, as you can see from the figures, it's at 50.6% now, but a year ago it was at 41.4%. And what we know is that this was impacted heavily. Some of our care leavers struggled through COVID in terms of working and being able to access education and employment. And there's lots of work going on with Michelle's service, which she'll probably talk about, in terms of making sure that we're being really creative and thinking about how we can support young people back into education.
Can I come back on that? So what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? I think like 50% is still a lot. What are we doing, Michelle? Thank you.
So what we are doing, I think as the report says, we've got some panels that are meeting weekly now. We've got staff that are contacting these young people almost every other day. But we've got to be cautious a bit here, because if you try too much, they totally disengage with us. So it's about a balance all the time. But we have put in some systems now where we're constantly contacting. I agree with you, the figure's not where we want it to be. I think we've got a lot of opportunities. I think that's the thing. It's not about the opportunities. It's about engaging the young person into those opportunities. There's no doubt that COVID had a real detrimental impact on this particular group of young. I mean, it impacted on all young people, but on this particular group of young people. We've got specialist personal advisors that are linking with these young people and contacting them. But as I said, sometimes they just say, do you know what, we're not ready to do this. We just don't want to do this at this time. And it's about the hook. It's about what will re-engage them back into opportunities. You'll know very well, Councillor, that we've got our Princess Trust programme that, you know, is an offer for our need. We've also got our On Track Thurrock programme. So there's things there, but it's about the right time for that young person to re-engage with that. I have to say, a number of these young people are struggling with mental health and mental health challenges. And again, we're trying to see what we can do, you know, with our health colleagues to see if there's support we can give them there. So we are actively looking at ways in which we can engage them. One of the things I think going forward is thinking about, and we do all the taster days, you know, we're doing those things all the time, but it is about, and the team will engage with the young person, they'll go, oh yeah, we're definitely coming to that, and then they just don't turn up, and then you're ringing them and they're not picking their phone up. So there's a number of reasons why that is, but what we need to do is keep continually offering that support. The door never closes, colleagues, the door's constantly open. We're always offering opportunities, and, you know, hopefully we'll start to see it increase as we come further out of the pandemic.
Okay, one for me to watch then. So on, I've got another question. Is that all right, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. On page 57, 6.72, so going back to my area that I know the most about is housing. And we do have some really good offers of housing, and I'm glad to see that we've moved away from sticking every young care leaver in the top of all of the high-rise flats in the studios, which Councillor Carter done his term there. So it's really good. I just wonder, what work are you doing with the local plan? Because I know that we've got some really fabulous new homes that have been built that are going out to Head Start. So how many more? Have you got a specific where it's feeding into the local plan? Because obviously I'm sitting on that group now, and it's something that I want to champion, that young people are being stuck at home, not just care leavers, but young people in general can't even go on the housing list at the moment, because if you're seen to be living with a parent or somebody responsible, they're not even allowed to go on the housing list. But we've got to find a way of doing something to reverse that, because it's not healthy for a care leaver or any young person to still be living at home when they're like 35. But they can't go on the housing list because they're not seen to be housing. So what is being done to feed into the local plan for housing?
So let me pick up on the care leavers first, and then the sort of general. So we're heavily involved with both our housing colleagues to identify opportunities where we can have some units built to actually support our care leavers. You'll know that we've worked hard to secure a range of properties via Head Start, which offers that transitional opportunity. So they come into Head Start for a period of time, getting them ready for tenancy actually. And I'm pleased to say that recently we've had some real success with our care leavers, where we've had direct offers from our housing colleagues that has enabled those young people to move in. They've had the support from Head Start, and they're now moving through. What we are looking at is, are there other opportunities for us to build further accommodation? There's a whole range of things we're looking at here, because it's not just about care leavers. There's also those young people that are struggling with their mental health and what support's available, because as you said, if you just put a young person into a property without the support around it, quite frankly, it fails, and that's not helpful. That's not helpful for the young person at all, nor is it helpful for our colleagues in housing, because they're trying to manage that. So we're involved in the local plan. We're looking at what opportunities will present themselves going forward. I think Head Start's a good model for that. I think we've developed the Head Start concept. I think that opportunity for transitional housing. I think housing's a national problem, isn't it? And I recognise that, you know, this plays out up and down the country really, but I think the local plan affords an opportunity now to look at what we can put in place to try and support some of those groups going forward.
I'm aware as well that our youth cabinet are involved in the local plan. So I've seen some information going forward from our public realm team with our youth cabinet. So we have got a youth voice in the local plan.
I'm really pleased with that because I'd like to see that reversed. That, you know, young people should be able to go on the housing list.
Janet.
So just sort of going back to care leavers a little bit, because obviously we're talking about those young people who are 18 plus. What we try to do is make sure that our plans for young people is the right sort of housing at the right time for them. So we recognise that there are some young people who want to stay at home. So if they can stay in their foster placements, we will always encourage that as a staying put arrangement while they're at university, or if they think, actually, I need to be here a bit longer, I'm not ready to be on my own, because not every young person is ready at 18 to live on their own. We look at creative solutions. So sometimes there are some of our young people who want to share with somebody else. So we're working really closely with our housing colleagues in partnership with them, and they've been really helpful to us to make sure that our young people get the right housing at the right time, but also that they get the right support alongside that as well.
Can I just come back on that? So it's been a while since I've sat on this committee, so it's been really interesting tonight. But when a care leaver goes off to university and then they finish their degree and come back, the last time I was sitting here, we was looking at allowing them to go back to their foster parents, because otherwise are we still giving them the opportunity that they can return back, and that they don't get their degree, because otherwise, at the time we had a young person that was going to do their degree, and he said, I'm frightened to go because will I fall out of the system and not be able to come back and end up taking all of my degree knowledge and all of the skills elsewhere, but when really I want to come back and live in Thurrock. So do we allow them to go back to foster care, or do we take a responsibility to house them when they want to come home?
Okay, so when a young person stays with their foster carer post-18, it's called a staying put arrangement, and both foster carer and the young person have to agree to that. We can't make a foster carer do that because it's not a fostering arrangement. But when young people go to university, we give them the opportunity. So if they're going to a university locally and they want to stay with their foster carer and that's an agreement, that's fine. If they're going to a university, say they're going, I don't know, to Manchester University, but they want to return to their foster carer during the holidays, we will support that. So we make sure that young people have the funds to be able to pay for their holiday accommodation. All of our young people we work with up until the age of 25 if they want that, and that's a responsibility we have. And they are our young people, and we would expect them to be housed in Thurrock, unless we, I don't know, so for example, if a young person's been placed in Manchester and that's where all their links are, their foster carer, you know, they've got friends there, they've got a job there, then we would work with that local authority to help them to settle there and remain there.
Does any other member wish to speak? Councillor Coxall.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on to page 60, placement distance. See, we had a little bit of a dip. I know we've dropped slightly by 2%. I'm just mindful of saying that while we're recruiting a lot of foster carers, are we recruiting? Why are we looking to still getting a lot of our placements beyond 20 miles and not locally? Perhaps is it? I don't know if we're recruiting outside Thurrock more widely, perhaps, or maybe a general increase in the number of children entering care at this rate. But just curious, really, what's with the number there?
So obviously we always try and place children close to home. That's a given. But it's sometimes, you know, if we don't have a foster placement in the authority, then a child will be placed outside. We always try and recruit within 20 miles, so we will recruit over borders. We won't sort of say we can't take you because you're just slightly over a border. But occasionally we'll have children that are placed slightly out. So we had a sibling group, for example. I think if review, at the LAC reviews, we had a sibling group of, I think, 7 or 8 children. Now, in order to accommodate those children, we didn't have foster carers inside Thurrock, and we wanted, those children couldn't all be in the same placement, but we wanted them to be close to each other. So they've ended up in a placement which is more than 20 miles away, relatively close to Thurrock, but more than 20 miles away, so that they could have carers who could work together and make sure that that relationship and that bond stayed together. You know, when you've got a cohort of this number, a group like that can make a big difference. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but that could be one of the reasons.
Does any other member wish to ask? Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair. I said in committee last year that we was going to need time to see the effects of COVID and how it was going to play out. And I think the report tonight shows that, yeah, we're still seeing that play out. And in my opinion, we've probably got at least another year, maybe even 18 months before we are finally seeing the rollout of that. And I think aside from the things that we know are always going to be issues, or at least they are at the moment, which is, you know, fostering the housing issue that Councillor Worrell was talking about, I think what we're actually seeing here is actually a good news story. I think because most of the indicators here are up, we're doing either better or pretty close to the national average. And you can see most of these figures are rebounding back to where they pretty much ought to be. So I think it's a good news story, and I think we should be proud of that. And I think the teams that work on all this should be proud of what they've done, because I think, you know, it's been a very difficult time, and I think the officers have done extraordinarily well to get these figures going back in the right direction as quickly as they had. So, from me at least, it's a thank you for everybody.
Thank you very much, Graham. I'd like to echo Councillor Snell's comments there. Does any other member wish to speak? I'll be moving on to sorry, I was reading the wrong one then. Recommendations 1.1 on page 46, please. Agreed. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to the work programme. That can be found on pages 63 to 65. Do members have anything to add to the work programme? No? All right, well, thank you everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I now declare this meeting closed at 8:37 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.